Hazara genocide.
Stop Hazara genocide.
Recognize Hazara Bhutan. Hazara Bhutan. Good evening, everyone. I'm Zoe Daniel, the member for Goldstein, also an independent. Tonight, I'd like to talk about two of the girls who were killed in this attack. In her diary, 16-year-old Mazia Mohammadi drew up a list of what she wanted to do in her life. At the very top of her list was to meet the best-selling Turkish-British novelist Elif Shafak. Mazia wanted to write a novel someday. But Mazia's book will never be written unless we tell her story through events like this, by exposing and condemning terror and persecution. Mazia was killed in the suicide bombing attack on the Kaj Learning Centre. Her 16-year-old cousin and best friend Hajar Mohammadi was also among those killed, the majority of whom were girls. And I see a photograph here of Mazia and her cousin Hajar. Mazia's story reached me via a report on NPR on this indefensible attack, which yet again targeted Hazaras, girls and education. Children should not be killed for going to school. Contacted by NPR, the novelist Elif Shafak said, "These girls were targeted and attacked both because they were female and because they were from a persecuted minority, Hazaras. They have been systematically discriminated against and denied their most basic human rights." A view that I've come to after my work overseas as a journalist, much of that time which was spent with refugees from Afghanistan in transit countries, particularly Malaysia, is that education is power. I believe it is the way to a powerful and successful Afghanistan. Yet attempts to crush the potential of the nation's women and girls, especially Hazaras, continue. Attacks targeting Hazaras, as you would know, have increased significantly since the Taliban returned to power last year, while the regime simultaneously goes about restricting women's rights and closing down girls' schools. This is gender violence, and it must be called out as such. The Taliban is not a government that I nor Australia recognises, but if it claims to be running Afghanistan, it must take action to prevent and investigate these attacks. If it doesn't do it, the UN must. I note, as has been mentioned, that advocacy groups have called for humanitarian visa processing to be expedited for refugees who've applied for asylum in Australia. I strongly support these calls for expedited processing. As a parliamentarian from a nation that was a participant in the Afghanistan conflict, we must live up to our responsibilities. Our visa system must be fixed, and we must have more places for people from Afghanistan, particularly Hazara women and girls. I finish by offering my goodwill and my sympathy and concern to all of you for the grief, the pain, the anxiety and the worry that you're experiencing in regard to this terrible attack, but also my thoughts are with your families and your friends who are still in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Raj is a Labor politician, I'm an independent politician. But I look at the faces of those girls in those photos and I think about the fact that Dr. Ananda Raja and I are women who have had the opportunity to have an education in this country and to become doctors and then to represent our communities. Those girls will never have that opportunity. As an independent member of the Parliament, I will hold the government to account. I will ask them to allow another 20,000 people from Afghanistan to this country every year. I will ask them to end bridging visas and to end chefs. There are 151 members of the House of Representatives in Australia, and you have 4 of them here today. We all care very deeply about what has happened to your community. We're all very, very sad for your loss, and we will do our very, very best to make things better in the future. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Monique. As independent members, as newly elected independent members in the Federal Parliament, it is very, very, very heartening to have you here with us, but to also hear what you're going to commit and how you're going to be holding other decision makers to account. And I once again apologise that you have had to push your plans back a little bit, and we deeply appreciate you staying with us and sitting in solidarity.
And one reason only: to call for Stop Hazara Genocide in Afghanistan. It's important that we acknowledge, we raise awareness, and we talk about the systematically targeted attacks and enduring genocide that the Hazaras are facing. So why are we calling this a genocide? Let me refer you to Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention, which defines the term as the intention to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. That's what the Hazaras have been facing and enduring since the late 19th century, when it formally commenced under the rule of Abdur Rahman. The Hazaras have been facing genocide for the last 130 years. During the regime of the Taliban during the late 1990s, it is one of the darkest parts of the Hazara history. Hazaras were massacred in large numbers, including the infamous massacre of Mazar-e Sharif in 1998, when in a matter of few days, thousands of Hazaras were massacred based on their ethnic identity, their religious affiliation. The Hazaras have been targeted because of their educational values, their human rights, their subscription to freedom and to democratic values. That the Hazaras have been facing an ongoing genocide, and it's time that we stand up, that we raise awareness, and we have the genocide of the Hazaras formally recognized by the international community. In the late 1990s, 62% of the Hazara population was eliminated, and it has been enduring ever since, either through physical violence or through genocidal policies through the government and through the institutions in Afghanistan. Call on the United Nations and other broader international community to formally recognize the systematic attack against the Hazara people in Afghanistan as a genocide. We know what the definition of genocide is, and it is about time that we recognize the endless sufferings and the enduring atrocities that our people have suffered as a genocide. We call on the United Nations to urgently form a commission of inquiry into the ongoing genocide of the Hazara people in Afghanistan. We call on all countries in the international community, including Australia, to take urgent measures to provide protection for the Hazara people in Afghanistan, including by creating an internationally assisted and monitored self-defense mechanism. Call on the International Criminal Court to open a case on the atrocities and the enduring genocide that the Hazaras have suffered, and to investigate this genocide. We call on all UN refugee resettling states, including Australia, to prioritize the resettlement of Hazara refugees as a special group of highly vulnerable people under the serious threat of genocide in Afghanistan. To all individuals, organizations, media, members of parliament, I urge you, please understand and recognize the systematic attacks and the atrocities that the Hazaras are facing is not just part of the general violence in Afghanistan. There are extra layers: ethnic identity, religious affiliation, subscription to human rights, liberal values, education, that the Hazaras are suffering. To recognize the genocide of the Hazaras and to not censor their identity when they release statements, reports. We must do justice to the victims. Censoring or filtering their identity, not mentioning their ethnic and religious identity, is an injustice.
The seat of Bruce, Senate here on Dandenong, has more people born in Afghanistan than any other electorate in Australia, and I think the largest Hazara community. A large share of the 71,000 Hazara people or thereabouts who now call Australia home. Thank you for your contribution to our community, for your support for democracy, for your love of education, and for your contribution that your children make to our primary schools and schools. I meet so many school captains from the Afghan and the Hazara communities. I'm so sad and angry again at this senseless violence, and we gather tonight here in southeast Melbourne as part of a national vigil held right across Australia. But of course, while making your contribution, building your lives here in Australia, Hazara people remain connected with the plight of other Hazara people in Afghanistan through family and friends and community links. And an atrocity like this reverberates across the world and affects us all. So for those people here tonight holding temporary protection visas or Chev visas, I say to you very clearly, we reaffirm our commitment to providing permanent protection in this country for genuine refugees. Permanent protection, permanent visas.
When?
I wish it had already happened, like you. I know the impacts for people. I talk to you every day in the community, in my office. I wish it had happened, but we are making good progress. It is not a simple thing administratively or legally, and has to be run through the budget process as well as there are financial implications. I'm pleased to say that we have now settled within the government on the solution, which we're testing with the Law Council of Australia, the refugee experts and others. We'll hope to have more to say soon after the budget in just a few weeks, but please be assured this will happen as soon as possible. I understand the daily impacts for people on TPVs. The ridiculous system of travel authorisations, which I hope we can soon get rid of, and your inability to sponsor your families and visit your families, especially in Pakistan. The citizenship delays and the family visa delays are also being addressed. The Minister has deemed them formally a high priority now to clear the backlogs. I'm also pleased to say there are about 4,000 or 5,000 people left in this country who applied years ago for the visa for their husbands or their wives and their children. They were actively discriminated against by the Liberals. And the Minister has formally committed, and I'm pleased to tell everyone, that he's now reviewing Ministerial Direction 80 to get rid of this blatant discrimination that is affecting so many Hazara people.